Welcome to A Healthy Curiosity, the podcast that explores what it takes to be well in a busy world with self-care strategies from Chinese medicine. I'm your host, Brody Welch, here to support you on your journey of health, happiness, and personal evolution. Welcome to A Healthy Curiosity. I'm your host, Brody Welch, and I am super excited for today's interview. When I first heard of Ali Shapiro, I felt like I had found a kindred spirit out in the world. Ali is the founder of Truce with Food. She's the host of a top-ranked podcast called Insatiable. She, like me, is a holistic nutritionist, an integrated health coach, and a rebel with a serious cause. She's academically, practically, and empathetically aware of how the medical system, diet culture, and body positivity movements all have their own flavor of crazy. And I just love her, like when I first landed on her website, just being able to, the fact that she calls out the fact that the things that women struggle with around body image, around our relationship with food, ourselves, our bodies, and self-worth, that these things are not individual struggles, but they are connected to this larger ecosystem called society that we are a part of. And so taking care of ourselves in all the ways that we may struggle to, or that we may endeavor to, are connected with things like we can't separate. We can't have that conversation without taking on things like sexism or patriarchy. We can't have this conversation without thinking of it in the context of a capitalist system that wants to just chew us up and spit us out, having extracted whatever labor power it can from us along the way, while we are desperately trying to preserve our human integrity. So I'm thrilled that Ali Shapiro is here to chat with me today about sort of this intersection between food, self-esteem, self-care, life, society, and the kinds of things that we need to overcome in order to take better care of ourselves in all ways. Ali, welcome to A Healthy Curiosity.
Thank you, Brody. I mean, the name of your podcast, like just in general, is like a rally cry for me. Yes.
Yay. Wonderful.
Healthfully curious. Healthfully curious.
Yeah, let's get curious about how we can do this thing of being well in a busy world, because the odds seem to be stacked against us in a lot of ways. So could you just expound a little bit on, we were just chatting before the show, on self-care as a feminist issue, and how, like, for both of us, self-care does not mean a fucking pedicure, right? Like, it's not a one and done thing. It's not optional. It's not indulgent. So what is it? I'd love to hear from you.
Yeah. I just wrote a piece in Forbes about how massages and moon circles, aren't self-care. And let me back up and say they're great and they can be replenishing, but they are not the destination with self-care. And, you kicked off with talking about society and our ills. And I think it's almost an insult to us to say that if we have children, we're afraid of them being shot in school, the environment, we're on the verge of killing the exact ecosystem that we depend on for life. And we're making, white women make 79 cents on the dollar. Black women make, I think, like 69 cents on the dollar. And they're like the most educated group of women out there. Latino women, I think it's like 62 cents. And so for you to tell me that a massage is going to help me, build my retirement because I get paid that much less. And so to me, I think it's a good first start. But I think the deeper issue here is, how do we take our anger and sense of injustice and use that to start to change the patterns in our life that are depleting us? Our anger and injustice comes often. We have to start at home before we can go out in the world. But the larger society has conditioned us to adopt certain identities that are really draining us, which causes anger and injustice. And truly.
So what identities are you thinking of specifically?
I call it the good girl mindset. And a lot of my clients would consider themselves rebellious. So they're like, I'm not trying to be normal. Normal's crazy, right? Mm-hmm. But whether you consider yourself a feminist, whether you consider yourself into health, we all have these norms that we think are good and guide that identity. So the way that we mother, what kind of mom am I? Okay, if I want to be a cool single mom, there's certain norms there, right? If I want to be the career mom, there's certain norms there. If you I don't have children, right? If like for me, it's like, what kind of business owner do I want to be? I want to be pleasant and easy to get along with, right? So no matter how rebellious we are, we're still trying to tap into a certain norm that is unhealthy because, as you said in the beginning, what I've realized is we have these nesting dolls of, you start with patriarchy, which assumes men are more valuable, right? So it's kind of like, oh, of course you would hate your body, or of course you would have no discipline around food. And it makes us think that we're crazy rather than the system is crazy. supremacy. Yeah.
Yeah. Or that like, I mean, just that spending so much time trying to beat our bodies into submission to look a certain way, right? That there's so much energy tied up in that could be put to better use. And yet it's not, if you're struggling, like I've struggled with body image issues all my life, like, and it's the kind of thing where like, I'm not proud of the fact that I still have those inner voices that tell me that I need to look a certain way or whatever. And it's like, and then I have like my more self-compassionate side comes in and is like, oh, it's like, you can't help it. It's the water we're swimming in. Like, it's like, you can't help but internalize those things. And so then layering on that layer of blame of like, oh, well, I'm a bad feminist for believing this, or like I should be more enlightened than to be swallowing this BS. It's like there's a certain level of like shooting the second arrow, right? Of judgments that we have against ourselves for even our best attempts at surviving within this cultural milieu that we're in.
Yeah, I'm so glad you brought that up because it gets even more layered. After patriarchy, you have this nesting doll of white supremacy. And then within that, you have capitalism. And so it creates this real matrix of who's privileged, what's right, what's wrong. And I think the system is designed to keep us confused. And when we start blaming, and it's designed for us to blame ourselves. And also here in America, you layer that on top of this meritocracy myth that is an individual myth. Oh, it's all about you. Your success and failure all rests on you without looking at the context, right? In Chinese medicine, you're looking at the system of the body, right? I think any of us...
The terrain in which disease arises, right? It's like disease doesn't just emerge by itself any more than genius just emerges by itself. It's a product of the environment and it's supported, that old phrase, like, that behind every successful man is a woman, like it's such a gendered way of putting it, but it's like, it couldn't be more true. Or like behind every successful whoever is the system that they are a product of, right? And that is going to make some people more likely to rise to the top than others. And it's not like they're inherently worthy. It's that they had a head start.
Yeah, I'll tell you what, since I've always been somewhat politically engaged in voting and aware of issues and paying attention. But after the 2016 election, like so many myths that I didn't realize I was believing in, even like entrepreneurship as an perfect example.
Sure.
We think like, oh, we idolize Steve Jobs. There's certain people. I mean, the way he treated people, that's a whole other conversation. But
we don't necessarily idolize Steve Jobs, but there is this myth of, or like that certain people are considered like the paragons of success, the icons that are held up.
Yeah. And research shows that actually 80%, they did this study, what makes entrepreneurs? Is it their risk-taking ability? Are they more creative? You know what they found?
What did they?
80% have access to family money.
Right, exactly. Right. Yeah.
Because if you have access to family money, you have access to a network. So the terrain that you live in is very different. Now, I think for women, what's exciting, the challenge and the opportunity are that we're living in this time where we don't need to be dependent on men for our resources. This is a recent happening, right? Unless the past 100 years, some women still are but often be based on choice if they're staying home to raise children. Or again, I'm talking in I don't even want to use first world, right? Because third world is like formerly colonized.
Sure.
But like I guess you would say capitalist societies and working class women. I mean, my mom was working class, have always worked, but we have more than ever a critical mass of us. We don't need everyone, but we have enough of us who can have more leeway within these structures to actually change them. And to me, that's what self-care is. And it starts at home to recognize how you're recreating these structures and which is just perpetuating the system.
I feel like our ability to role model self-care and self-respect is how we change the culture. I think that self-care is a radical act for women precisely because of the socialization and perhaps perceived necessity to quote unquote like work harder, keep your nose to the grindstone because we're earning less than men, because we're still expected to do more of the care for kids or elderly parents or whoever needs caring for. And that when we decide, hey, I'm worthy of care as well. I'm just as worthy of care as the people that I'm supposed to be caring for. And we start acting so there's a yin and a yang, right? There's the belief. And then there is like how we demonstrate that belief is true. And so I've been thinking about kind of like, if I really respected myself, what would I stop doing, right? Like, would I let myself get overwhelmed? Like, if I really respected myself, would I allow myself to sleep when I'm tired? Like, would I push myself to do more when I'm exhausted? Would I, just like, and like the list goes on in terms of like, and so I've been thinking a lot about like, what are the habits? How do we embody self-respect? And some of that comes back to like, if we are a beautiful being worthy without doing a thing, how do we treat that person of inherent worth? Like if this is a human rights issue, like like how we treat ourselves, that what are those habits? What kinds of what things that our lives would be like? And how would our relationship with food in particular be different? I'm wondering if you could speak to that a little bit.
Yeah. So two things. First, I think that I said this is a matrix, right?
Mm-hmm.
And part of being in a patriarchal, capitalistic, white supremacy culture is that you start to orient towards needing to approval rather than having your own wants and desires.
Mm-hmm.
And so I hear a lot of people, and I hear a lot of self-care rally cries are, we have to put ourselves first. And what gets tricky is we often are doing that, but not in ways that we're aware of. So if we're depleted and we're like, okay, I just need to go to bed, but that threatens our good worker identity. That threatens our good mom identities. And so we are putting ourselves first in a way, but it's in a way that gets the approval of others versus the approval of ourselves. And so I think that's really important for women to understand is that, and again, most of us, there's a privilege matrix here that we could go down a rabbit hole.
Sure.
However, most of us, if we're listening to podcasts and into health and wellness, there are often ways that we are putting ourselves first that we are just unaware of.
And those ways, like in other words, like that giving more, allowing the image of who we think we need to be, the image that's going to gain approval by society, giving that our energy and attention rather than honoring kind of that inner voice or that inner knowing. Yeah.
Yeah. I'll give you a couple concrete examples.
Sure.
So
that'd be great.
So there's 3 patterns that I really work on with my clients, and they're called the comfort eating styles. These are the reasons that we comfort eat. And this again comes back to not thinking that a bubble bath is going to be a substitute reward for chocolate that we want at night. We don't want chocolate because we want a reward or pleasure. It's like, why aren't we getting pleasure and reward in our days? So one of the big patterns is the accommodator, right? One of the is accommodating other people, right? So people will say, why do I always say yes when I don't want to do that? Well, you're accommodating people. You're preventing a potential conflict.
Yes.
And so this happens. It's kind of like a death by 1,000 paper cuts, right? So you're at work and you're ready to leave. You have your new plan of self-care to leave at 5 o'clock
could you just do this one more thing?
Yes. And it's like, oh, sure. Because I don't want to look like I'm the high maintenance one, or I don't want to look like the difficult one.
Right. Or I don't have a good enough reason, like that just that it feels self-indulgent to just be like, you know what, I'm just leaving because I'm done, like as opposed to like all these other people, well, maybe they have kids or maybe they have this other, and I don't necessarily deserve to just say no.
Exactly. And then you come home and your kids and your husband all want a different food, right? So how we eat is how we live. And so no one wants to eat the food. So you accommodate them and you end up becoming a short order cook. I see this with my clients, right? So you start getting tapped out. And part of the way that the accommodator frames things is win-lose. So rather than thinking about what's a solution that's going to benefit me and the request, I'm just reacting because I don't want to threaten being the bad mom, the bad worker, the bad whatever, right? Whatever identity we would think of as like, for a big one of my clients, I don't want to be thought of as lazy, right? Like I'm a hard worker, but that's a different pattern that we can get into.
It is. Well, and in Chinese medicine, I just want to like layer on that each of the elements has its own pattern that I've identified as like kind of the survival strategy. And so the accommodator sounds very much like kind of a people pleasing earth strategy. So like the earth element, like earth, what is the earth all about? It's about nurturing all life. It's about being giving and generous and loyal and indeed accommodating, right? You can dump toxins and poison into the earth and it'll just take it for a really long time, right? Until something breaks. And yet the earth is also like often like the glue that holds the family together or that holds the company together or that like that there is something about that earth type that is beautiful because that person wants to be sweet and loyal and like has your back through everything and like all that. And so that can feel like if I assert myself, if I use my wood element, well, wood busts up through the earth. Wood, like the upward, outward energy of wood, which has no problem a lot of times taking what it wants, or just going after its dreams, right? That displaces earth. It creates disharmony. And so it's like allowing that fear of conflict to prevent that necessary assertiveness of like, actually, my need is this right now, that can be, that's like, it's an element of the earth element, the taste of which is sweet, becoming saccharine,
right? As opposed to like the nourishing sweet of a sweet potato.
Oh my God. I love that you can layer that on because yes. And what's reminding me to bring these metaphors further is that like we switch back and forth between these, right? It's not a permanent situation, just like the same way the 5 elements are.
Right.
You might have seasons of this and there are pluses and minuses to this.
Absolutely.
And what I found with my clients is that in the past, these have served them very well, right? And as you were describing about the wood, it made me think of and you tell me if I'm on point, is the other pattern is the second one is the competitor. And the competitor is the one who's like, I'm going to win, I'm going to succeed. And this is often what has gotten us very far in our careers.
Absolutely. So that wood element, right, is all about wood is the archetype is a tree, or specifically bamboo, like it is often used. Bamboo shoots up out of the ground. It grows rapidly. It is always growing. It is always like striving. It's the energy that it takes to grow and to be like on the leading edge, the cutting edge, the early adopters, the leaders, the teachers, the people who are out in front. A lot of times that takes a lot of drive, and a lot of time that actually takes us, like it requires more fuel than we have in the tank, right? And so there is that eventually like kind of yawning ourselves to death with the wood element can be very depleting, right? But yes, definitely like that competitive, having high standards, being perfectionist, like all of this could fit with the wood type. It doesn't have to.
Yeah. And what unfortunately, because we're the common denominators, we then also compare ourselves to our previous bodies, our thinner bodies, other women's bodies, right?
Our energy on our good days, or like when we've had enough sleep, when like if today everything went wrong and I feel like crap, can I hold myself to the same standards? Is that kind?
Exactly. And then it's often and what I've realized is then we frame situations in black or white, right? I'm either ahead or behind, or I'm winning or losing. And so we bring that intensity, which again can often be really helpful. It's part of what's gotten us so far. But for most of my clients, it's now what's causing the chronic depletion. And the good news is like, you don't have to, like, you can have it all in a way. And I want to explain that later, but I want to get to the third pattern. And
I'd love to hear the third pattern.
I wonder what this would be.
Okay.
Metal? I don't know. You tell me. Okay. So the third pattern is the avoider.
The avoider.
And this is what we call in Truce with Food. And I have to thank Jack McNeil, who's a great coach that I work with, who gave me this terminology, but it's the chuck it, fuck it people. It's the yielding. Maybe it's the water. I don't know. But it's the better not to rock the boat. It's not worth saying anything. It's not worth speaking up for my food allergies. It's not worth it is basically, and it comes over, this condescending self-doubt comes over.
Yep. So I would root that on the water element, because the water element contains our will, or what we call the G. The will with a capital W is our sense of power, our sense of agency. And so it houses our unique essence. And so when we are looking at ourselves and going, not very valuable compared to hers, or compared, like that, it's just when we're not valuing who we are at our core, or when we don't feel like, as you're saying, like that we're important enough to stand up for or to take action on behalf of, right? Like the kidney it's sort of like, it's the root, right? So yes, it's water element, but it's also in that it houses this essence and it houses our will. Not being willing to stand up for ourselves, like that is, I would say that is definitely a deficiency of the water element.
Yeah. Oh my God. I love that because to me, like truth has to cut across like theory, race, class, gender, and like,
and so paradigm.
And paradigm. Yeah. So those are the 3 patterns. And
while we're at it, we can go Vata Pitta Kapha on this, for the Ayurveda fans, right? That like the competitor, like that's way Pitta, right? That's too fiery. And the accommodator is going to be very Kapha, right? Very sticky, very like overly sweet. Vata, Vata, would that fit with the avoider?
I could see that in the sense that like you're trying, like avoid, like part of this is we make really quick choices. Like it's not worth it. Like rather than getting more information, it's like, And one of the pattern of avoiders, while accommodators think in either or, competitors think in black and white, avoiders think in all or nothing. So it's kind of like the fantasy.
What's the difference between all or nothing and black and white?
Well, I think it's the way black and white sees things as 2 choices, and all or nothing is more about proportion. So it's kind of like, oh my God, I'm going to have to be perfect with my diet, versus competitor might be like, I can't eat this or that. Like it's more of a, like, this is good and bad food. So it's about breadth versus distance traveled, or proportion, like the drama behind it with all or nothing versus kind of how far you have to go. So latitude versus longitude. So so those patterns, and you said something about conflict. And this again comes back to the cultural waters we're swimming in patriarchal and white supremacist supremacist cultures, we are taught that conflict is bad. I mean, I bet if you're listening to this right now, you think of conflict and you're like, oh, I'm just going to stay eating the chocolate. This isn't worth it sometimes, right? But conflict can actually be really creative and really constructive. And the quadrant that I'm always trying to, this is based on the Thomas Kilmann conflict model, which I've adapted to eating and how we battle food. Because, right, it's representing an internal psychological conflict. So it's the same concept. But what we're always trying to get to is collaboration. Collaborating first with our bodies, our sense of self, and then moving out into the world with our vision rather than just reacting. And that to me is self-care. That's where feminism needs to go. The body is kind of like the last frontier, right? And when you do this, you really start to decondition and decolonize your mind because you start to realize normal is crazy. No matter what normal you're trying to orient to, you have to get out of that. And you start to get comfortable and more emotionally agile in uncomfortable situations. And your life ends up getting so much better as you build more resilience. You take courage, you take risks, it pays off. I can't tell you the way that when my clients are done with me, they're either entrepreneurs, artists, or leaders, and their whole style changes and they start becoming more in alignment, which to me is what health is really about.
In a culture that glorifies busyness, it's easy to overextend ourselves, making the days longer by making the nights shorter, working through lunch, blowing off exercise, beating ourselves up for not meeting our own impossibly high standards. It can be really easy not to notice that comfort behaviors like numbing out with Netflix and a bag of chips have become regular substitutes for feeling connected to ourselves, loved ones, our intuition, and creativity. Until you realize that you're not in the body that you want. You're not experiencing the joy that you want, but that you don't know quite how to break out of the cycle. It's time to put yourself at the top of your own to-do list and start embodying self-respect. What might that look like? You'd get enough rest. Eat, move, breathe, and connect in ways that honor your being, not just your doing. You'd set boundaries to have more time for what matters most. You'd feel less stressed, more calm and confident. You'd feel lighter and more comfortable in your body. And leading by example, you'd help everyone around you do the same. That's how we roll in my Level Up group. See, I believe that you have the right to take care of yourself, even before all the work is done, and that when you do, you get more done in less time and are able to show up for the people that you love with kindness and patience. I'm looking for 5 people who are ready to start practicing self-respect this September in the next round of Level Up. It's hard to go against the grain of an entire culture by yourself and way easier in community. If you're ready to start honoring your being, visit the Level Up page at brodywelch.com and schedule a discovery call with me. If it's a good fit, I'll invite you to join this life-changing community. That's Brody with an IE, Welch with a CH, and hop on my calendar. Now back to the show. Well, let's get a little more concrete, if we could, into these different styles that we've just been through identifying and their relationship with food. Like, how does knowing that we have one of these styles, what can that show us about, or what is the relationship with food like as we try to ground this into our daily behaviors? Like, I would love to know how to not go for comfort eating, for example, or just, and yet, I feel like I've made a lot of progress on this. I recognize that I have this lifetime history of eating, inhaling my food as opposed to actually eating it because I was trying to do 10,000 things. And so I'd be eating literally in the car on the way from one thing to another, or just that, or not stopping to take a break from work and eating at my desk and these things. And it's there doesn't really seem to be a downside. Is it really hurting me? Is it really, that? Sure, I might eat more than I would want and then feel like crap about my body or whatever. But it's how can I pull this self-awareness of these patterns, the identity, this sort of identities that we're clinging to that you've labeled, that how can we use that understanding to inform our choices around food?
First of all, to answer your question, I would say if it's not really bothering you, then why worry about it? I mean,
well, and I think that really, that's a good point. Is there's got to be a why, why bother changing something, except for the fact that that I know where that goes. It just that if I inhale my food, it means that I'm not digesting or absorbing it nearly as well. And it also I don't enjoy how I feel afterwards. I don't enjoy the guilt that gets layered on afterwards, and I would much rather give myself a break. Like I would much rather, like it is definitely, it's easier to just do that than it is to sit with the discomfort of like, oh, I'm not actually getting anything done here because I'm forcing myself to chew.
Yeah. Well, and I would also offer, because one of the things that I tell my clients is, and tell me if this is tangential, but
sure.
I'll give you kind of the pattern. But
Yeah.
The reason that we turn to food when we're uncomfortable is not because, at least with my clients, again, they've been doing this for a while. So what happens is there's a lot of things I'm going to find. We're also bringing, because we are an immature country, I think we can sit on the Nash right now.
And that we have like a toddler in charge. Right.
That's generous. So what happens is the reason we turn to food is first of all, I'll work backwards from there. I joke that it's a BOGO. It numbs us out from discomfort and it rewards us in the brain, right? Food companies spend hundreds of millions of dollars so that when we eat that fat and carb combination just in the right amounts, it lights up the dopamine receptors.
Yes.
So and
it literally is down to a science. Like they have people researching this. And so yes, like if you're into the processed foods, there's a reason for that. It's like that you've been skillfully manipulated by very smart people with the backing of multi-million-dollar companies.
Exactly, right? Hunger used to be like elastic demand. You couldn't make people more hungry.
Right.
And they're like, so we have to figure out how to increase demand. And so there you have our current food supply. So what happens is we're basically getting rewarded for avoiding discomfort. And over time, we get less and less resilient. But the tricky thing is, talking about our stories right now is very popular. And I agree. And I use story in my work, but I use it a little bit differently. And that why food is actually numbing out the overwhelm in our nervous system, like in our bodily discomfort. And that that reaction that's happening in the now is echoing from the past. So it's not just the, I don't want to disappoint you from today. If you haven't healed your past, you're getting some residue of that today. And so it echoes in this way that feels so overwhelming to the nervous system. You can't think your way out of this. So what you need to do is start to catch yourself accommodating or avoiding or competing earlier and earlier and seeing this pattern, not just with food, right? Like, and I can give you some concrete examples with food, but also in our lives, because there's a difference between people will say get present, but when we're getting present, what we're experiencing in our body is part of the past.
Oh, so absolutely. Yes. Like there's a reason that you're triggered in whatever space that you are, or there's a reason that you're feeling whatever it is you're feeling.
So there's the present and then there's the now, right? They're happening simultaneously. Like most times people think, they're afraid of conflict. And my clients come to discover like 80% of the time there is no conflict, but they couldn't see any other way because their nervous system was hijacked, right? The amygdala was like, So to make this concrete, I really think the first step, don't worry about the identities. Identity shifting takes a good 6 months to a year. So I don't want people to start to do that. But what happens is
that's what I've got my course for, which is what like where a lot of it goes down, right? Like when we start pulling on the threads of identity, it is scary. It's way easier to not shift. And that's where you absolutely need support to hold your hand to remind you that you're not going to die and you're not going to get kicked out of the tribe for letting down this like socially acceptable, socially appropriate survival strategy that you've been empowering your whole life.
I'm so glad you said that. People find so much. I think people heal exponentially sometimes in groups because you're seeing you're not alone and all that stuff. But it just really is a complicated process.
But you're saying, so leaving aside identity shift.
Yeah. So starting to bring awareness, because the awareness again brings clarity, because so many of my clients have these idea that they're not disciplined, that they don't have willpower, and that it really is about the food. But I always use the example of like peanut M&Ms. If I'm going to quote unquote be bad, they happen to what I love, right? When I'm being good, like the peanut M&Ms are still the same peanut M&Ms. And when I'm good, I'm like, oh, they have high fructose corn syrup and that bag has 2 servings, and you get all kind of nog. But then when you're quote bad, you're like, I don't fucking care. I'm taking the peanut. I don't care about guy number 6 blue, whatever it is, And
so, none of that is as important as what I'm getting out of this peanut M&Ms right now. Like I need the nervous system to be calm. So I'm going for this thing.
Yeah. So I encourage people to start to bring awareness, like the peanut M&Ms did not change.
Right.
Or your favorite food, we changed.
Yeah.
And we didn't lose willpower. I mean, the women who think they lack willpower, when you look at their lives, and like, you could not run your life without discipline and willpower. So I want people to have a healthy curiosity of what triggered me today. And then what creates the overwhelm in the present is thinking that you have to avoid, that you have to compete, or you have to accommodate. So you can even start when you like review your day, and usually at the end of the day, because you'll have more distance. Like when my alarm went off, was I like, what am I going to eat today? Do I have to battle food? What am I going to wear? What am I going to get back on that email? Start thinking about those triggers and then what mode you start to go into. And I really think that's the first step. And then when you're around your food, a lot of my clients won't speak up about what they want. They're avoiding advocating for themselves. Mm-hmm. Or, I joke, accommodators just take what's on the menu. My husband's always like, you never order anything that's on the menu. You always have to do, I'm going to do this, this, and this. I'm like, because I want what I want and I know what I need. But accommodators, I joke, will just like order off the menu, right? Rather than saying, hey, can I substitute this with this? Or, I need to do this. Or when they go to friends' houses or like charity events, oh, I feel guilty saying no to the food. They paid for this, right? Like that's an accommodator, right?
Right. Or like, but this person made this for me. And even though it's against, like, even though I know I'm going to feel like crap if I eat it, it's a gift and I have trouble not like, what do I do with this? I was just handed this thing, and recognizing that you can accept the gift and you don't actually have to eat it.
Yeah. And acknowledging the person that like, wow.
Yes.
Because a big part of the problem with accommodators is they don't know what the other person needs. They assume they know. Yeah. And so the other person wants to be acknowledged. Like food is symbol, right? So if you can say, wow, I am so touched by this. It means so much. I'm going to take it home and I can really savor it and pace myself with it. And, it's like, that's fine. Or like competitors, right? They set these unrealistic timelines of I'm going to lose 2 pounds. I'm going to get to the gym 5 days a week and I'm going to compete with what I used to be able to do versus saying, wait, what's my rhythm right now? What's my pace for where I am now? And so that's how people, I think, can some concrete, is that concrete enough of kind of how to get started?
I think so. There is, because certainly like the awareness piece, could you go over that again? Like, just because a lot of people I know listening to the show have meditation practices or journaling practices or awareness practices of some sort. Is there like a particular question that you like to have people focus on, or like how do we attune our awareness specifically so that we can get traction?
Yes. And that's a great question, because one of the challenges I think with certain types of meditation is you're still replaying the same thoughts in the same way. You're still seeing the situation in the same way, right?
Yes.
Versus you're perceiving how it is, right? It's that perceived conflict versus reality. So I think a really great question is to like ask, where do I feel wrong? Where am I worried I did something wrong? Where do I feel at risk is another way of saying that. But what am I worried about doing the wrong thing?
That's kind of an extension of what am I afraid of, right? Or that like it's more of a socially confined question. Like, where am I afraid of being wrong? Where am I afraid of doing wrong? Where am I afraid of screwing up?
Yeah. And often it even starts again on the surface with food. People are so overwhelmed. They're like, one day coffee is good for me. One day coffee is bad for me. Or one day or like now this thing, I've tried this thing. Why can't I do this? Why can't I complete the Whole30? Why can't I do a vegan triathlon? I don't know. I mean, I see all these crazy stuff, right? Like, and it's like, I'm wrong. The assumption is that we're wrong rather than that system is not, that piece of that does not work.
Right.
So it's again, how we eat is kind of how we stress and how we live. And so, but if you can start to see if food is the big start there, your stress is the big pain point, start to see it there, but it's all the same pattern. We're the common denominator.
And I love that. And I love your phrase or your tagline, a truce with food is a truce with life, right? Like that really, it's like, and that bigger quote, right? How we do anything is how we do everything. That is certainly out there. It's like, it's certainly problematic to some degree, but it does. It's like our approach, how we are approaching our relationship to food, or to stress, or to ourselves. It's like there is the attitude with which we approach all of these things is likely the same. And being able to explore that, we can come to different choices.
Yeah. And I don't know if this will be helpful again to kind of give an over idea of kind of the process but we get triggered and then we have a story about that, what it means, right? That's the echo path. Mm-hmm. That was true at one time that we would fail if we were uncertain or that we would reject it wrong, right? Or, I mean, I was shamed for being fat. I remember like this boy on my bus came up to me in 3rd grade and was like, you're fat. And like, I knew that was bad, right? Like even though my parents were great and like, whatever, like you just internalize that, but you get a trigger. There's a story that was true from the past, but may or may not be true today. And then you have that stress response. Either you're competing, avoiding, or accommodating that create the overwhelm in the nervous system because we think, I have no choice. I'm damned if I do. I'm damned if I don't. Right. Or I only have 1 or 2 choices. One choice I hate, one choice I don't love.
Yeah.
And then we have our out of aligned eating or out of aligned any unhealthy habit. And then we lose self-trust. And then we start to trust other people more than ourselves. And it creates a vicious cycle because we're not tuning into our own needs of our body body and of our mind and our souls.
You just said something important, I think, and that is that reestablishing self-trust and how like we're so like that you just walked us down how we stop trusting ourselves. And then of course we've got this like 20 billion diets out there of people trying to capitalize on our lack of self-trust, right? Like that we're outsourcing our like answer to how to eat, like, which should be such a simple question, but our government is subsidizing crap instead of actual food, right? And so that's it. So unfortunately it's like, it is very intentional that people are confused about food, but how can we start rebuilding our relationship with food and trusting our own sense of what's good for us?
Yeah. So one of the first things I love people to do is do a food experiment for breakfast. Okay. Do like a vegan breakfast, like quinoa with walnuts and cinnamon, and then try a paleo breakfast, like eggs with spinach or kale and like half an avocado, and pay attention to how you feel for the next 3 to 4 hours. Your body will tell you. You will get a clear result. And if you can do both, you do great with the Mediterranean diet, right? I don't believe there's one diet that works for everyone, but you have to experiment because your body will tell you. Because we don't trust ourselves for so long, we've internalized that we're broken, that we can't possibly know. But that would be my first recommendation.
I love that. I'm all about helping people run experiments in their own bodies and to observe the results. I would even extend that to the entire day or even a few days. Like if you've got like a food allergy situation, it may not show up that day. It may show up. I had a woman in one of my courses who just did a Whole30 as an experiment and realized that something she had been eating every single day was contributing to this heaviness and this brain fog and this just overall sluggishness that she was feeling that she wouldn't have known otherwise, or even something like coffee, which like for me, it's like even just that, like it took me, like I think of myself as like, I eat very cleanly. I scrutinize what I eat, like maybe to a fault, but recognizing that like, oh yeah, that yawning during exercise at 5 p.m., right? Like is very linked to the amount of caffeine that I was consuming far earlier in the day, right? Like I wasn't necessarily associating that energy drop with food at all, or in this case with my caffeine intake, but ran that experiment and discovered, yeah, actually there is a link there. It had much less to do with the amount of sleep I was getting and much more to do with the nervous system jacking up and then crashing down that was happening on a time frame that was longer than I had maybe been looking at.
Yeah. The reason I start with a breakfast experiment and just even doing that for like 1 or 2 days is because blood sugar is a lot easier to recognize.
Oh,
like
yeah.
What you just described, I would say, and probably take people a couple months to figure out their bodies, right? Because especially if we're binging or overeating, it's kind of hard to like, so you're like at the advanced stage and maybe your listeners are as well. Like, I think that's amazing, but I think that would take.
Yeah. Right. No, it's definitely not necessarily a starting place. And I couldn't agree more that like just starting with something, just beginning to observe like, okay, how does my body feel with this kind of input versus this kind of input? What was my mind doing? You know, like did I have stable energy? Did I have mental clarity? Was I hungry immediately? Or, you know, those kinds of things. There's all sorts of things that we have the potential to observe even from one meal. And it can feel really daunting to do like a week of a food journal where you're supposed to write down absolutely everything and how you felt. I mean, like it can be a lot. So,
well, I'm glad you said too, connecting it to energy and focus, because again, some of the traditional dieting advice is like, wait, see if you're full in your stomach. And it's like the body doesn't register hunger that way.
Right.
It registers it in our energy, in our cravings, in our focus. So I'm so glad you brought that up. Connect each of those meals to your focus, your stamina, and your cravings, not if your belly's full.
Right. And like nothing on the label is going to tell you whether or not that is going to give you that sense or not, right? Like because we all, obviously we all have different dietary needs. We all have different systems. We all have different things that we digest well or not. And then there's the whole strength of the digestive system entirely. Like that can all be strengthened, and the same food 1 year to the next may have a very different impact on you. Again, because we can't deal with any of this without also looking at, well, how stress impacts digestion and how, and how just how the energetics of food may be making it difficult for your tiny little digestive fire to metabolize everything that you're throwing on it. And so it's like, or the time of year, like smoothies in the winter versus the summer. We have different enzymes available, like even deer, right? Deer chewing on like leaves and things like that. At certain times of year, they have the enzymes to digest them. And at certain times of year, they don't. And it's the same food. And presumably deer aren't like eating because of stress or like, that everything like that. But anyway, there's a lot of factors to tease out. It can be very confusing and it can be dynamic because we are dynamic. And yet and there's some clues along the way in terms of how cultures like, really any traditional traditional culture and how it's eaten, but also specifically these wisdom traditions like Chinese medicine or Ayurveda that focus a lot on the energetics of food is this whole other thing to explore that could be missing for some people if there is a sense of like, wow, why can I handle cooked kale but not raw kale? And it's like, oh, well, like a very, very, very different raw vegetable. So much challenge.
I'm just so glad you brought that up because it comes back to what we kicked off with, which is this individual myth that we live by in the West, especially here in America, affects everything. We don't think about the context, and we are part of nature. We cannot dominate nature. I mean, we can dominate. We will not win. Let's put it that way. Right. We will not win. And thinking about that. And I think that's what's so important about our self-care too, even, right? Is like these patterns. And this is why I love focusing on these patterns versus sometimes self-care is going to look like going to the gym. Sometimes it's going to look like taking a nap. And when you really know yourself and know what's working for you, you can then figure out what exactly works for you in self-care as well. And when you're in uncomfortable situations or perceived uncomfortable or real comfortable situations, you can learn how to navigate in that moment because you can't get tips and tricks.
Right.
Like every situation is different. Like working with a colleague versus like I had one client, like she had a team member who wasn't performing, right? And she went and she realized she was avoiding talking about it. And that's what was causing her to eat at work. Cause like every time she's like, oh, this interaction makes me so uncomfortable, right? So it was uncomfortable to say anything, but it was also uncomfortable to work with this person. So it was a team member of hers though, right? So she has power there versus if she's going to her boss's boss, she has to have a different approach, right? It has to learn how to maybe not compete and over prepare and all that kind of stuff. So not to throw like more complexity into it, but this is, I think sometimes women especially blame themselves up because they haven't figured this thing out yet. And it's complex. I mean, there's paths and it's at least in my work, I try to simplify things rather than add more to do because who has more things they want to add to their list? But I think people need to realize that being holistically healthy is a process and requires context.
It is contextual. It is different from day to day. The only way to do it is to present moment as much as can. And for that, to speak to your earlier point, is that to also look at past and how the past is informing present so that we can transcend it. And so that we can also then sort of not only be our most present selves, be able to take care of ourselves, best information we have, update our files on ourselves in real time, but then be able to contribute by example and with our potential to changing the culture at large. And every ounce of work that we do on ourselves around this, I believe is culture shaping.
Oh my God, completely. In fact, one of my favorite quotes is by Naomi Wolf. Have you heard it about?
Oh, I love her. Yeah.
Yeah.
I read The Beauty Myth when I was like 12, I think, or like whenever it came out. It was, yeah. Uh-huh.
Yeah. But I think that to me, like hits my clients in the gut. But do you want me to read it?
Go for it. Yeah.
Okay. So that is, I'm trying to find it. I didn't.
Is it the one about like when a culture that has women so focused on their bodies? Yes.
But it basically says that dieting is not about you. This is Dr. Naomi Wolf. It basically says that dieting is the most potent political sedative in women's history. A quietly mad population is a tractable one.
Yes.
And it just basically says dieting is not about me.
Right. Exactly. Right. It's about keeping you occupied.
Yes. And powerless.
Yeah,
and not
exactly.
Your power.
Exactly. Well, that's a great place to leave it. Ali Shapiro, if somebody wants to work with you or learn more about you, where do they go?
I always tell people start with the quiz. What's your, we switch between styles, but what's your dominant one? So if you go to alishapiro.com, my comfort eating quiz is right there on the homepage. So
awesome.
That's how I think people can start to check it out, play with it, see if it resonates. And if it does, awesome. If not, there's many paths.
Yes. Thanks so much for joining me today.
Thank you, Brody.
This episode is brought to you by my Inner Alchemy Retreat. Hey, what you doing next February? How about you and me and 20 others escape the dark, wet winter and go hang out on a quiet beach in Mexico for a whole week? I'm thinking a world-class retreat center with a 5-star restaurant serving us delicious prana-rich meals, luxury oceanfront bungalows, qigong on the beach. We could do some breathing and moving and some yoga, maybe some snorkeling and surfing, take a long walk at sunset. We'll pulsate between some deep relaxation and deep inquiry work, looking at ourselves through an elemental lens, how wood, fire, earth, metal, and water are at play in our lives, and grounding these concepts in our bodies. You'll emerge feeling renewed with an armload of new self-care tools and a jump start on who you're becoming in 2019. I've been leading transformational retreats since 2012, and they are powerful in addition to being a total blast. But don't take my word for it. Head over to the Mexico retreat page at brodywelch.com. That's Brody with an IE and Welch with a CH, and read what past retreat peeps have said. Then sign up. You know you want to, and you deserve it. When you claim your spot by August 1st with the promo code PODCAST, you'll receive a free downloadable copy of my most popular meditations, Advice from Your Future Self, the Healthy Eating Meditation, and the Breathing Bundle. So head to brodywelch.com right now and check it out.
Thanks for listening today. For more episodes of A Healthy Curiosity, you can visit the iTunes store. If you appreciated today's show, please leave us a review. This helps other people to find the podcast. You could also head to brodywelch.com, where you can find free self-care resources, learn more about Chinese medicine, and let me know what you'd like to hear about on future episodes. I'd love to hear from you. Till next time, be good to yourself.